Welcome to the Battery Testing Mentor podcast, a podcast about battery testing, battery validation, battery handling, battery safety. I'm Johannes and I guide you through this topic, and I'm really happy that you join me on this journey. Also, if you want to get the summaries of this podcast, sign up on the email update on batterytestingmentor.com. There's an sign up form. If you leave your email, you get a summary of the podcast and kind of always a reminder when the new podcast is out. Also, let me know your feedback, your ideas, your wishes, what I should cover. I'm happy to do so. Just reach out to me, answer on this email, or go to LinkedIn. There you can reach me. And I'm happy to reply. Today, I was honestly quite a long time thinking about what should I do? What should I prepare as a podcast content? Because I have a lot of ideas, a lot of topics, but none of them seemed really right for this moment. I don't know why, my gut feeling told me so. And then I looked at my old podcast and everything that we did so far in this Battery Testing Mentor series. And I realized that I talked about performance testing, I talked about safety testing, but I didn't talk yet about environmental testing of batteries. And basically, I thought this is such an important groundwork that we need to do, like at least to cover all three areas of testing, that I immediately said, let's do it. Let's talk today about environmental testing. What is environmental testing? It tests the influences from the environment in very short. And this is done not only on batteries, it is done on everything, really, like from some small components to, it's just endless. Like environmental testing is done on basically everything that is used, especially when it's used outside or in some environment where there are many different influences. Like, for example, if you do it inside the house, you need to do far less environmental testing because you can say it's always like in a certain temperature range, but especially outside, you have large fluctuations. And I mean, the first thing that you think about, of course, is temperature, then coldness in winter times and the heat in summer times, but it's not limited to that. It's kind of the one thing that is most prevalent for like in everyday life, but it really describes what comes from the environment on the battery. And this ranges from the temperature to mechanical influences, to humidity influences, like really everything that could be around. And there it also depends to evaluate really how the battery is used. I mean, going a step back, how any component that you want to use in a final application, what environment it is in. But as we are focusing on battery here, let's stay with the batteries. And batteries are typically used in electric vehicles, in stationary systems, in other mobile applications. And especially when hearing the word mobile, it is kind of the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, mechanical influences. These mechanical influences are vibration, are shock. So, for example, if you go with your car and drive across a bumpy street, for example, or if you go like down a step, for example, on the pavement or so. And here we get already to the point where you see it's maybe a little bit fluid, kind of. What is the differentiation between safety testing and environmental testing? Because a shock, an impact is happening in environmental testing, but it can also happen in an abuse testing scenario. And the difference is there always kind of what is the intended use, what is normal in the use, what should not lead to any problem, and kind of doing a test that is happening in a use case outside the operation condition. So, for example, if you're involved in an accident, this is kind of really a shock that is attributed to safety testing. If you just like go down on a pavement step, for example, with your car, you need to say this is normal use. I mean, you don't do it every day, but it can happen from day to day or from time to time. And then you don't want that suddenly your battery falls apart. And these are the mechanical aspects, but then there are many, many more aspects in terms of humidity and this whole range from humid to really water and wetness and immersion. There is a whole range. First, the battery should, of course, be able to be used in a normal environment, like when it's even protected from rain. It does not need, in this case, to withstand really the water, but humidity will always come there. Unless it's really in some room that is humidity protected and there's humidity control and artificial, like it's that air is dried and so on. But who sets up this just for having a battery? You want to have your battery used in a normal environment, and that means also humid environment. And this leads kind of to the next point, that when the humidity goes to the battery, it can also go inside the battery, because the battery is also designed to be operated in different altitudes. This is another point of this environmental testing. What happens at different pressure levels? And of course, if you have the battery at ground level, at the kind of sea level, kind of 0 meters altitude, and then bring it up to like 1,000 meters, the pressure decreases, the air volume in the battery increases, and then like there is a seal, a valve that releases the pressure, the air. And the same way needs to go backwards as well when you go down the mountain again. And then, of course, maybe humid air goes into the battery, and then like the air inside the battery might get more humid. What happens if you then do temperature changes? What happens if you do temperature shock and you kind of try to instigate a condensation of the battery? There are like many aspects, and this is kind of the next step then for this environmental testing. It's not only one specific item like temperature or like the humidity or the altitude or the mechanical aspects, but it is often a combination. So for example, what happens if you do temperature shocks, like heating the battery up and cooling it down, and then have, for example, a very humid atmosphere around, or you even dump it into water, and then you say, okay, the battery was heated up, and it cools down in different speeds, so the case might lead to like it will work, it will move a little bit. Is the sealing still tight, or is there a risk that then the water from the immersion gets into the battery case and then really can get close to the cells? And of course, you do this in basically every combination that you can think of. The stopping point is, in the end, what is sensible, what is reasonable. Like, it doesn't make sense to combine everything like altitude and humidity and temperature and vibration as well. And then you have a huge chamber, a massive shaker, and you are struggling how to make sure that really everything works as intended. Therefore, you make targeted combinations that really can kind of address one combination, and then you do different tests. And these environmental tests can be very, very long, because if you really want to make sure the sealings are okay for a long time, you also need, for a long life, you need to test for a long time. Yeah, so combinations are possible. Not only possible, it even makes sense to combine different tests. And maybe we go once again back to this whole topic of environmental testing. What tests are there? We talked already about temperature testing, so heat and cold, and seeing how this affects the battery. We talked about altitude, like the pressure changes, how the pressure change inside the battery versus outside, how the battery can handle this. We talked about mechanical influences, vibration, shock. You can even go to 3-dimensional vibration. So not only the typical shaker, which goes only in one axis up and down, but 3-dimensional where it kind of really can simulate a real driving condition. We talked about this water topic. So basically from humidity, it goes into more and more wetness depending on the battery use case. Their IP classes are very important. The IPX and so on. Maybe do another episode once about these IP classes, because there's a whole topic. And a part of these IP classes, then also the dust impact. So particles, what can particles go inside the battery? But then there's also the aspect of particles. Can they damage the battery? So there's, for example, the stone impact test that should simulate, like if you drive with a car over sandy surface, for example, and there's those small stones that get chipped up by the wheel and hit the battery, is the case affected? And then we can go also into the aspect of corrosion testing or corrosive substances, where you mix, for example, sand with water and expose the battery to it, or really do salt water as salt spray testing, where you have this dust with salty liquid that really is super aggressive and corrodes kind of everything it can corrode. So this is really a test of the plugs, of the sealings, and any kind of weaknesses of the battery. Especially here, when you do the test for a longer time, like a week or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, you get really, really good results on where are the weak points. If you do this only for a day or 2 days, you will have superficial or surface corrosion, but it's not really going deep, and especially these small weak points you probably will not notice. What is also important with this environmental testing, that in the end, it really makes sense to disassemble the battery, to open it, to look inside and see what happened, what did get inside, and what did the thing that got inside, what did it affect? Like, did it go to some certain place that is at risk, or did it just like spread out? There's some impacts on the electronics and so on. And also another aspect, it often happens that you, of course, overlay it with charging and discharging and try to operate the battery during the test. On the one hand, to add more element of temperature, as with the charging, you heat up the battery as well, but also to continuously validate that the battery really works. So you have definitely this combination out of environmental testing, performance testing, with this charging, discharging. Environmental testing and safety is kind of this fluid point. Also, if you say, for example, you immerse the battery into water, it's definitely something that doesn't happen so often, and where you could also say, okay, maybe if a whole vehicle is immersed in water, it's maybe not really used again, but still you want to make sure that everything is fine. And then you can really do this whole process if you want to really validate that your battery is safe under all environmental conditions. It takes you a long time. Keep this in mind. It is a whole process. It's also costly. And it makes sense, I have to say, because the worst thing that can happen is that really the battery start then burning in the field, and you have recalls and so on. So yeah, makes sense. With that, I think I covered the whole range of environmental testing, of course, only from a top level. We can really go deeper on certain environmental tests. If you want to talk about one specific test, please reach out to me. Let's make an episode about these tests. And if you have any feedback, let me know. Also happy if you find the time to rate the podcast. I'm always happy about any feedback I can get. With that, I wish you a pleasant 2 weeks ahead, and hope to see you then next time again.